But thanks everybody for having me. I'm Kojo, and I'm going to do a little talk about black vultures, about some of their really interesting social and nesting behaviors. So I think they're a very underappreciated bird, and I did a lot of research on them. So now I have all these facts and really fun video clips that I'm doing absolutely nothing with. So I'd love to talk to someone about them. So yeah, so this is what I call Vulture Village. I'm very proud of that alliteration, and it's a look into the fascinating world of black vultures. But first, a little about me. Yeah, I'm a 22-year-old birder and photographer from Baltimore, and I started birding around 6 years old. And that was because I read a really good book about raptors, like a children's book. I actually got it from a book fair in first grade, and I distinctly remember not being super impressed with it and looking around for anything else, but I couldn't find anything, and I really wanted the book, so I just ended up getting it and absolutely loved it. It was the coolest book ever. And I instantly went to the library, picked out three more other birding books, just regular field guides, read those front to back, and eventually just started birding. And so I've been birding essentially since that age, and have been fortunate to go around on young birder camps and just around the country and around the world. Also school sponsored, doing some really cool things and being able to see some really cool birds. But one of my favorites is right at home, and up in Philly too. So yeah, the black vulture is a bird I studied for my senior thesis project, and is a really, really cool bird that I didn't really ever mean to study, but it was kind of interestingly full circle because it was also one of the first birds, along with the turkey vulture, that I remember seeing and being and thinking, hey, that's the bird from the field guide. And it was a very distinct memory for me. So it was pretty full circle that I ended up working on them. And I've always thought they were underappreciated, not just in the world in general, but also in the natural world, or sorry, in the bird world, birding world, I should say. Yeah. And currently I'm an interpretive naturalist for the Cape May Bird Observatory. So I do a lot of visitor services and pointing out birds and talking to people at the migration counts. And it's a really fun job. Very much enjoying it. And I wish it lasted longer. But enough about that, and on to the vultures. So here's a lot about the black vulture. It's a common wet-spiked species found all over the New World, not just the US, but also in Central and South America. And it's actually a lot more common there. So as for the 190 million breeding birds worldwide, I had to look up that stat, and I'm still not super convinced because that's a lot of birds. But also, I was able to go to Panama for my for a study abroad semester back in my junior year of college, and there every single time you look up, I kid you not, there are at least three vultures in the sky, which not doesn't seem like a lot, but that's at least. Like at the most, I probably saw 50 to 100 of them in the sky. They're just literally everywhere down there. They're almost like if some of you might know the term trash bird, which is kind of a term you use to describe a common bird that you see everywhere, like a house sparrow maybe is a trash bird, or American robin is a trash bird. It's kind of a not a great term, but for vultures, they almost are literally trash birds down there. Not just because they're seen everywhere, but also because they are literally seen at the dumpster nonstop. And yeah, even though they're scavengers and obligate scavengers, which means that technically they have to scavenge to stay alive. It's not just a skill that they can employ at some points during their lives. Like the bald eagle, for example, is a what we call a facultative scavenger. So it doesn't always scavenge, but it can. Vultures are actually the only obligate scavengers in the world. So the only birds that primarily only feed on carrion. And that's actually really interesting and really important because without them, the world would be a lot dirtier and have a lot more disease. But yeah, that's what most people know about black vultures. But what is less known is how social they are. If you've ever seen vultures at a carcass, you usually see some turkey vultures and some black vultures. But unless you do an eBird checklist, you probably don't notice that the black vultures probably usually outnumber the turkey vultures. And that's because they're an incredibly social bird. And this sociality doesn't extend just to food sources, but also in communal roosts as well. But before that, I'm going to talk about my research a little bit and then get into the stuff. So for my senior thesis research, I worked at Hawk Mountain Sanctuary. At Hawk Mountain, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with since it's in Pennsylvania, they do a lot of really cool research, and one of their projects is a Black Vulture project. So Black vultures are extremely common in that county. I think it's Cycle County. I'm not sure if I'm saying right, but it's a rural county in central East Pennsylvania, central West Pennsylvania. No, East. Okay, yes, East Pennsylvania. And no, that's not right. Anyways, okay, so and it's really a lot of vultures there. But there's also a little bit of a conflict with the vultures because they're um, rumored to feed on weak or old or newborn cattle or livestock. And so a lot of farmers think that they will. And it's kind of unknown whether they do or not. A lot of times they will come in to eat a dead um, animal, but it's not super well known. But they are extremely messy, and once they get to an area, it's very hard to remove them. So Hawk Mountain does a lot of interesting uh what's the word homeowner outreach landowner outreach rather and a lot of interesting behavior about the vultures. But what I did was I studied nesting and social behavior with them. So that involved placing camera traps at nests and communal roosts, assisting with weekly measurements and potato tagging efforts, and then most of all, learning what a vulture reality TV show would look like because they are really dramatic and quite entertaining. So they form these communal roosts in areas primarily that provide them with a lot of food. And in this area, it was a pig's pen where the vultures would actually enter the pig pen to eat the food. And I'm not sure which came first because I heard they've been roosting that area for a while, but they're there pretty much all year, and they bother the pigs a great deal. Nothing crazy, but they'll just pull its tail and just annoy them, and but they won't ever leave. And I'm sure they are a bit of a nuisance to the landowners, but they are also also a really great setting to watch how they interact with each other. And so that's basically what I did. The picture on the right is one of the only times I actually got to hold a vulture. They're actually quite quite feisty. They start out very what's the word? Docile, but then as they grow, they become harder and harder to wrangle. And so this was the first time going out, and I got to hold one, and they're really cool. But warning, I wouldn't suggest holding one because the stench does not come out for a while. They're quite sticky, but that's okay. It's part of their charm. So oh, sorry. Here we go. Okay, so yeah, but I'll get into nesting habits. So pairs are monogamous and mate for life, and they also closely associate throughout the year. And although they're social in other aspects of their life's history, as we'll see, they breed in seclusion. So they'll breed close to a roost, but generally aren't in close contact with any other breeding pairs. They prefer dark, quiet areas with cover, which ancestrally were caves, tree cavities, hollow logs, places like that. But more recently have become abandoned human-made structures like barns or the attic of like a silo kind of thing. Yeah, things like that. So they really like these agricultural areas. And they don't actually build a nest. They just lay their eggs right on the floor, which you could count as lazy, but also might just be efficient because they don't really need it. And they're actually really devoted parents and invest a lot of time and energy into their offspring. Males and females will actually switch off on incubating in 24-hour shifts. Here's a video of one of our camera traps of a bird leaving nest. You can see a little bit of a nesting in the corner, but so there's a little window out there, and that's just how they leave and enter. Um, some of their entrances aren't quite as straightforward, but I believe that the human-made nest sites is one of the reasons why they've been able to expand north. They're actually, if, some of you may know that they weren't always found in this area. They were probably found more in the southeast, and they're more common in the southeast still. But they've been expanding north pretty quickly, especially in the past couple decades. I think Vermont just got its first breeding pair pretty early, or pretty not pretty recently. And so yeah, they're really getting up there. And the northern limits of the range, they probably migrate. And they are their movements aren't well known in general. Down in Central South America, they don't migrate at all, and probably not in the Southeast. But there are migrants, and it's really hard to tell when one is and when one isn't. So some hawk watchers don't even count them. We do here at Cape May, but I think we only have 4 or 7 for the season, so they're not super common at all. But there are locals as well. But yeah, Black Vulture young are long or slow to develop. So a lot of raptors only take about maybe a month and a half to leave the nest, but black vultures can take over 2 months to reach fledgling age. And after fledgling, they also remain dependent on the parents for food and protection for up to 8 months. They're bred primarily through regurgitation. So here's a video of 2 guys begging, and they're going to come over, and That's how they get fed. It's a little. This is actually not. I picked the least graphic clip I could find. It's not really graphic, but it is certainly an experience. And that little flapping behavior is how they beg for food. There is a sound involved. I think it's just kind of a. They don't have vocal cords. They don't make much of a sound. Um, but these clips, at least the camera trap clips don't have sound, unfortunately. They're also the cutest ever. So here's a video of them from when they're a little bit younger. So yeah, they have more down feathers. They start with those down feathers and then they grow real feathers. And you can see this is the left photos or right photos, what they look like a little bit closer to fledging. But this is what they do pretty much all the time. They just sit there, test out their wings, and it's almost like it's contagious with them. It's like they'll sit still for very long periods of time, essentially waiting around for mom or dad to come back with a meal, and then one of them will start flapping, and the other's like, "Oh, I want to do it too," and they do. So as they grow, they get their black feathers, and then they lose the down. So the photo on the right is what one looks like a bit closer to fledging, and that photo was actually taken on a day where we came to tag them, or no, sorry, not to tag them, to measure them that week, and we found out that they were up in the rafters. So because eventually they start exploring, and then they realize that they might not be able to fly yet, but they can jump and flap their wings and stay airborne for a little bit, just enough to get up. And so we realized that very soon that there was going to be no tagging happening and or measuring happening, and it was time to tag them. We put potato tags on them. So if you know California condors, they get the wing tag right here. It's kind of like it's almost like an ear piercing, but it's on the front of the wing there. And they're working on tagging the entire or as many birds as they can, but it's a very thin window. It has to be before they can actually leave the nest, but where their wings are fully developed because you don't want to do anything harmful. So it's a bit of a process, and it's funny because when you go in with them, they can at that time they're still probably in the rafters because most of our nests are in human-made areas, and then you kind of have to go in there with a net and get them. And it doesn't always work. Sometimes they end up taking their first flight, and they're fine because they're the age that they are supposed to fledge. But there have been times where we have chased one up and then waited for it to come down and then looked down for a second and looked up and the bird is gone and it just fledged. And the parents know where it is, they take care of it, and the birds do just fine. But it is really funny to watch and kind of embarrassing that we get bested by this bird that's just 2 months old. But they're really wily, they're quite smart. Also, you shouldn't mess with them. This is a photo and a video of kind of the typical pose that they strike when you come up to measure them. And I'm gonna play this sound. Yeah, so that's what you hear when you approach a black vulture, especially the young ones. They do a little hissing, they do a little I guess yeah, you can call that a hiss. They don't have, like I said, they don't have vocal cords, so they can't make many noises, but they'll hiss and they'll bark and maybe do a little baby hiss. So that's just kind of what you hear the whole time, and it's really quite frightening. It does its job well, I should say. And especially frightening and because not all the areas are as well lit as this nest was. So sometimes you go in and you don't know where the bird is, and you just hear this hissing coming from a dark corner, and you're like, oh my God, like is this the end? But they are harmless, and the only harm they do is throwing up. A lot of people have probably heard that they'll projectile vomit. That's not quite true. What they do is something called lightening the load. So when they're in duress and cornered, they'll throw up their last meal just to make themselves lighter. When they can fly, it makes it easier for them to take flight if they need to. But when they're young, it's just kind of like and it also smells very strongly. So it's a way to just scare off any potential predator. And I can tell you from experience, it does its job. I mean, I like them a lot, but I never got thrown up on personally because I just got lucky. But my grad student did, and I'm telling you, the smell does not come out. It's really quite scary. So it's a really good defense mechanism. And I'm sure it works on many a predator, but they are the cutest thing still. So I'm gonna play that hissing noise one more time just because, oops. Oh, that didn't work. Because it's the I don't know if I'm convincing anybody, but I think they're the right. But they're also really goofy. And so this is kind of what they do half the time or 3/4 of the time. They run around, they get little hyper moments. They're much like human babies. They get a little hyper. They'll sleep one moment, and the next they're running around, flapping their wings, and it looks like they're having fun. And to an extent, they are. Just a lot of young animals any of any species will do this behavior. Just, but they're also training for the future, as you'll soon see. They're strengthening their legs, strengthening their wings, and getting ready for a tough life outside the nest. So it's really it's quite fun to watch. And I have countless clips of them just running around their space doing this. And these guys got lucky that they were born in an area that allows them to move around like this. Not all the nests are so um have such an area that's really free of movement. But here's another clip just because it's so good. You're gonna watch one go crazy. And like I said, it's kind of like what's the word? Transfers really from one bird to the other, infectious, if you will. So and that bird flies up and then they run. This is go flying or running up and then in the corner with his siblings. So yeah, they are really quite charming to watch. And I didn't end up doing anything with the nesting data for my thesis, so I just have all these clips of them running around being so incredibly funny that I now just post on Instagram, and they have quite a following because people love watching baby vultures, apparently, and I'm glad they do. But yeah, siblings are also frenemies. So they're not always, having fun playing together. They are kind of instigators, and I can relate because I'm the youngest sibling, and so you can see the bird on the left here kind of starts the little I'm not sure if it's playing or what it is, but then you can see the bird on the right kind of goes after the sibling a little bit, and then that one's like, "What was that for?" And then retaliates in just a second. You think it's all over, and then one on the left is gonna, yep, and kind of freak him out, and then they just go crazy once again. So they never really fight to the extent that we'll see in a little bit, but they're definitely learning how to, I guess, not be as awkward. You're gonna watch the one on the left go after this little twig, which they did quite often. So yeah, they're very curious, like to explore novel items in their environments, for better or for worse. There aren't many items, but you'll see they kind of mess with us a little bit as well. Um, Here's an episode of them not being enemies. They're more on the friend side. So this is a little video of them allopreening. And allopreening is a really interesting behavior that black vultures do. Where you can see they have feathers all over their bodies, but not on their heads. And all vultures don't have, most species don't have feathers on their heads because, of course, they poke them into carrion. And so, in order to reach, in order to clean, they basically mutually groom themselves. And it's only done with birds that associate, which are mates and family members. So you can tell two birds positively associate, at least when they alloprene. And it happens in the nest with siblings, with babies and parents, and then also outside of the nest again with babies and parents, and with even extended family members as well. So it's a pretty interesting behavior that is helpful for figuring out if you're interested in whether two birds are related. Yeah, it's very helpful. But yeah, like I said, they like to explore novel items in their environments, and unfortunately, sometimes that includes our cameras. So we're gonna watch these two guys. This bird on the right is going to hop up, and basically when we're picking up our cameras, we see a couple clips. The cameras are motion activated, so they don't get everything. Sometimes they don't activate with motion, but then this bird kind of spies the camera and then it starts preening, and you think you're in the clear. But then when you're opening up the file, you can see that the next files have a weird camera view that seems like it got tampered with. You're like, what happened? And then so look at this guy. He's eyeing us here, and then he's gonna run out of frame. And then the next second, he moves the camera. And this wasn't it wasn't like it knew it was being watched, obviously. It's more just checking out this item that it realized, wait, that wasn't always there before. And unfortunately, this was a nest that we had to use a ladder to get to. And it was a really difficult insertion. And so we didn't check it for about 2 weeks. And this happened maybe 2 days into placing the camera. And so we found out that we got like 3 clips, and then one of them was just the bird moving the camera, and then it gets actually moved farther down. And then the only other clip in there is like a little dormouse that triggered the camera as it's face down. So that was kind of cool to see. But as for data, we didn't really get much there, but it's okay because it gave me all these fun clips. But yeah, after I was supposed to have another clip here. I'm not sure what happened to it, but after fledging, young vultures integrate into the nearest roost, but they're at the bottom of the hierarchy. You can see this bird that flew in right here is a young vulture. It has still a little bit of the fuzz, the down fuzz, right at the back of the head there, and for some reason that's it's consistently the most stubborn spot. It's about there from about a month for 2 months after fledging. And it helps tell juvenile vultures, which is nice. But yeah, you can see they kind of get bullied. And that's why they need help from mom and dad, not just for feeding, because vulture um feeding sites are pretty much, if you've ever seen them, they are a bit of a party, but I guess not really a party is the wrong word. They're a zoo, I guess. There it could be anywhere from 5 to 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 vultures all squabbling and trying to get a little piece of whatever roadkill deer or whatever it was that died. And so young vultures, as you can imagine, since they can't really fight very well, they have to be defended by their parents and fed by their parents. So in the meantime, they always get bullied. This is an adult on the right that just kind of lunges at them a little bit and gets them to move over. Um, but also, here's my clip. I should know. They do still have a place in the hierarchy, and I'm not sure exactly how they figure it out. But within juveniles, you can see that they actually display a lot of the same behaviors that adults do. So this is a really short clip on the left here, but it's of two juvenile birds right here chasing each other in the same way adults do. Yeah, so a very short clip, but you can see that somehow they form these hierarchies and they know how to attack um, and kind of form their place. And then this clip is of a juvenile bird that was checking out its feather. They're not really sure what they can eat yet. And so we're checking out this feather. And this is actually an immature bird on, I believe, on the left. And you can see the juvie bird kind of has some chops to him. And even though immatures are technically, actually, no, I lied. That is also a juvenile bird. It just has this rough up. You can still see some of, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but a couple of these little fluffy areas here that remaining from the down. So yeah, they get their place a little bit, and so a lot of that the zoomies, as I like to call them, that behavior, even though it's really funny to watch and looks like they're just playing, it also helps them strengthen and figure out exactly how they're supposed to act in the world, and they prepare themselves, if you will. So yeah, back to the science a little bit. So I'll talk about sociality. So sociality allows individuals to develop complex methods of interaction, and group living provides a lot of fitness benefits, but also comes with competition and conflict costs. So black vultures, um, even though they, in a sense, cooperate to find food, they follow each other to food sources. That also means that you get less of the pie, and you have to find some way to differentiate yourself, namely being very aggressive, in order to feed enough for yourself and your children. But communal roosts are in a really important setting for that sociality. Yet a lot of studies on behavior are few and far between. There was one researcher who did a lot of stuff in the 70s and 80s about black vultures, but besides that, there really isn't much. I'm not sure that's because people think there isn't anything there, or whatever is left is too difficult. I wouldn't say I found anything novel, but it was a really cool way to figure out what they do. These guys here are just all sunning after, you can see the mist. There was actually just a storm, and they're all together. This is the roost actually at Conowingo Dam. I'm not sure if anybody's been there. It's normally a place that you go for eagles, but there's actually a really great vulture roost there. And so I went a lot this summer to get some really cool videos of vultures that were out of my thesis research, just more for fun because they're just so fun to watch. But yeah, communal roosts function as what we call food finding information centers, which means that roost attendance facilitates food finding. Once a bird that has been successful in finding a piece of carrion returns and looks, I'm not sure exactly how they figure out, maybe it looks full, there's some other method of communication. Birds will follow that same bird or group of birds the next day to that same area. So you'll watch the number of birds at any given food site increase over the next couple of days, unless it runs out, of course. And also, roost attendance varies a lot. Young birds tend to wander from roost to roost. I was talking about their migratory patterns and how we don't really know much about it. But and what I mean by that is that we know that young birds wander, and that can be north, south, east, west, from roost to roost, and have a lot of turnover, while breeding birds, for the most part, tend to stay in the same few roosts close to home and close to where they breed. Um, but at the same time, immediate family members will maintain close contact throughout the year, like with what I said with young remaining dependent on parents for up to 8 months, which is a lot for a raptor, especially. But at the same time, you have families of unknown relatedness. They're thought to be nuclear families interacting cooperatively in coalitions at roost and feeding sites. So that means nuclear families essentially um, have they form little gangs and then they fight other coalitions and help each other out. If one bird's getting beat up, two other birds will step in and help. And the way you can tell who's in the coalition is not just by genetics, but also by mutual allopregnating. But coalitions can also include, or are thought to include, also unrelated birds in immature vultures. Immature vultures have a lot more extra familiar associations, is what we say. So they associate more with birds they're not related to. So, but allopregnating is just a way to tell that two birds are not enemies. But then again, aggressive interactions will primarily take place between unrelated individuals. So in the nest birds, they don't fight exactly. I mean, you see those two siblings squabbling, but they never actually fight. But then when you get outside the nest, there's a lot of fighting that happens, and it's really interesting. So one of the things I looked at primarily was aggression in vultures, and that takes several forms. So in terms of aggression, I meant lunges, beak toss threats, pecking displacements, chases, and full-blown fights. So like I said, aggression is primarily aimed at non-kin, and how dominant a bird is, so how often it wins or how often it's the one dealing out aggressive behavior, is dependent on age and breeding status. Older birds tend to win more fights against younger birds, and local breeders tend to win more fights at roost closer to breeding sites. And that means that since older birds are more likely to be breeding, they actually don't breed until the earliest age of breeding is age 8, which is super late in the bird. I mean, even bald eagles, which are larger than vultures and probably a little bit longer lived, start breeding at age 5. And it's possible that vultures breed earlier than that. They gain sexual maturity, I believe, at age, I think, 2.5 to 3 years old. But we don't really know what exactly happens in that time period. They seem to delay breeding for some long period of time. There's just so many of them that they're able to do that. But yeah, they do fight a lot. And what's interesting about the fights and chases and fights and just aggressive behavior in general is that losers of fights are less likely to be present at the same roost the next day. So if you can imagine a younger bird gets beaten by an adult that breeds nearby, oftentimes that younger bird is not present at the same roost the next day. And younger birds are also less experienced at finding food. They are often following other birds to food sources, probably breeding adults which have babies to feed and are likely finding a lot of those food sources. So that means essentially that younger birds are able to exploit older birds, but older birds in turn fight that exploitation by beating them up and making sure they don't come back. So they can essentially selectively reduce the number of potential followers to a carcass and control membership at local roosts to a certain degree. We don't really know that degree, but it is really interesting to watch them interact. So for this left video, oh, sorry, we're going with the right first, apparently. That's a beak toss threat right there. I'm going to rewind that. It's just kind of like a little nodding motion, and it basically means get out of my way, or else I'll make you get out of my way. And it's a kind of a, yeah, I'll get into that a little bit more later. Then, oh, sorry, that didn't work. Okay, here we go. So big toss threats, and then that bird tries to retaliate. We have a little fight, and then somebody gets chased off. So that was a little fight. I'm not going to say that was like a full-blown fight, but here's a lesser interaction between two birds. I was trying to photograph or videotape this bird in front, and I realized the other two were having a staring contest, which kind of precedes an aggressive interaction usually. So they're sizing each other up right now, and then the right bird is gonna do a little pecking displacement there. That's what a pecking displacement is, and then lunge at him. So nothing really happened after that. Usually they are very low stakes. Chases and fights are a little bit more high stakes, but all of these interactions, for the most part, don't dictate very much besides membership or temporary membership. But yeah, in terms of my thesis, I examined the conditions, surrounding chases and fights. I found that chases were triggered more by proximity between two individuals by any particular behavior. I was trying to figure out if there's any behavior that birds do that really triggers a chase from another individual. And there wasn't really. It's just that a bird would fly in and then another bird would recognize it, not really sure how, and then chase it off. Beak toss threats occurred more frequently before fights than chases, which made sense because the signal is supposed to warn arrival of willingness and intent to escalate into a more physical interaction. no bird technically wants to fight, or no animal wants to fight, because that expends energy that you could be using doing something else, and it can be physically costly for your condition. But if they find that the conditions are more ripe for fighting, then they will. But also the presence of a threat signal, at least by one bird, the instigator, if you will, like the first bird to beak toss, was not necessarily a reliable indicator of the winner of a fight. So that means that fighting is probably most common between individuals who are at similar levels in the hierarchy. And it's not a linear hierarchy, meaning that it's not like bird A is always going to beat bird B, which always beats bird C. It's not like there's one bird at the top and just goes down. It seems to be a bit more complicated than that, but it's hard to say for sure, especially because all the birds were not tagged. And so you can't exactly construct a hierarchy because you don't know which birds are fighting at what time. Some of the birds were tagged. You saw the bird in the sociality slide that had a little potato wing tag 70H. That was actually a USDA wing tag. They're also doing some population estimates out there. But that bird showed up really frequently to that roost and always kicked butt. Always. I think I saw it fight or at least chase around birds a lot, hardly ever fought, and really only got chased off one time over about a month and a half of videos I was watching. So that bird was probably pretty high up. There were other birds who sometimes won an interaction, sometimes were the ones getting chased off. And so it's hard to know without knowing birds' identities, but it's likely that dominance hierarchies were not linear, but it was still really cool to watch them interact. And again, it was like a reality TV show. So next I'm going to show a couple videos. This is just a chase. So you'll watch this bird down by the pig slot, but on the other side of the fence flies in, and then the bird on top of the fence is eventually like, just get out. I don't want you here. And I'm going to chase you all the way out. And they go really far. There's actually a really large hill on the top where the horses come out, and they would chase birds all around that area. One thing that sucked is I wanted to figure out how long chases last. Some previous research has found that they can last up to 7 minutes, but I often couldn't because they would often just fly right through that area, and then I wouldn't really see them again. Sometimes I saw like the next minute, like a minute would pass, and then they'd come flying back, and it was probably the same two birds, but it could also be different birds. There's no way to tell. But that's kind of a typical chase interaction. And here's a different interaction that I took at Conowingo. Here, two birds are beak tossing, and here they're trying to fight. They're about to fight. And then they size each other up. There's a beak toss threat right there. So it's like, I'm going to fight you if you don't move away. I'm going to fight you. And the other birds, sometimes they return the beak toss threat. Sometimes they just sit there. But basically not backing down is indication that you are ready to take the fight. But then a third bird comes in and chases, challenger off. So sometimes the fight never actually really happened. So the third bird that came in was likely an affiliate of the bird that's still remaining in some way. It could have been a mate, could have been a sibling, it could have been some other family member. We have no idea. But it's really cool. But actually could have even been an unrelated bird that had beef with the bird that got chased off for some reason. We don't know exactly how it's chosen, but how they choose, and also how they identify each other. That's also one of my biggest questions. There is I think some research showing that they might have individual facial patterns, like the folds on their faces look different. But a lot of times, like in the first clip, you can see I kind of cut off when that bird that got chased off flew in, but there wasn't much time in between it flying in and then it getting chased off by another bird. So they can identify each other somehow. If I knew how, I would be elated, but I don't. So I'm kind of forced to just have a bunch of really cool clips. But they're cool. Here's a clip of a full-blown fight. So this bird walks in and beak tosses right there, right here. Yeah, that's a beak toss, and pecks at the other bird. And then, so one of the forms of fighting that they do is they'll sit shoulder to shoulder, and they'll eventually get down and just peck at each other and try and push each other off. And the first bird to essentially lose its balance, or I guess, I'm not sure how they figure out who's winning here. But the first bird to, I guess, give up gets chased off. So you see they're pecking at each other and pushing each other. These other birds are flying in maybe to witness or to step in if necessary. And then eventually, one bird relents and then is chased up all the way off there. So this is a clip that I did not take. This was done by Bracken Brown, who works at Hawk Mountain and is kind of the resident vulture guy. But it was really cool. It was the first time I'd ever found a fight in the footage, and I saw them describe it, and I was like, oh my god, it's a shoulder push fight. It's crazy. But they'll also do something that vaguely resembles
a fight. Ooh,
sorry, this one has my
they're duking it out.
my
I got that.
Oh
my goodness. Oh, keep going. Uh-oh, 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 uh-oh.
Yeah, so
You better run.
yeah,
Uh-oh,
so
they're
they
coming.
really get into it. And I'm gonna play that one more time because it's really cool. So the fights can take a lot of different
Oh,
forms.
there's a fight. Ooh, 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 they're duking it out. Oh, I'm glad I got that. Oh my goodness. Oh, keep going. Uh-oh, uh-oh, uh-oh,
Yeah.
uh-oh.
So it's really cool how they have only a couple short exchanges. Usually the fights don't last that long, 30 seconds at most, and they're able to determine like if it's maybe a couple seconds long like that one, who is up top. Um, and that's it. But yeah, they're not all aggressive though. They also enjoy quality time if they're related at least. So this is the allocating behavior again between two birds. So again, probably mates or family members. They can get really into it. It's quite cute to watch. But yeah. And then here's another kind of cute clip that actually gets spoiled by a third wheel, I think. So a bird that appears to be an enemy of either one of them walks in and for some reason spoils the fun. And you can see they're not very happy about it. Yeah, I'm not really sure what happened there. I don't know if he was jealous or what, but yeah, a lot of times I'm just filming and then something random will happen. I'm like, oh, cool, got that on camera. I mean, they're just the coolest. And one really cool thing that they do is they retain their mischievous ways for life. So one really weird quirk that they picked up is pulling out the rubber parts on cars. This is the sign from Conowingo that says, "Warning: Vultures may cause damage to your vehicles. Park at your own risk." And they do indeed. Sometimes they appear to consume the rubber, sometimes they don't, but they like windshield wipers in particular. I'm thinking it's possibly an enrichment activity because the way they pull at it is somewhat reminiscent to the way they pull at meat on a carcass. And so maybe one bird did that and was like, "Hey, this is kind of fun. Everybody should do it." But especially at Conowingo, they really like you park your car, you walk away. 5 minutes later, there's a vulture perched on top. So I unfortunately like to record it because it's the funniest thing ever. But I will say disclaimer: I do not let them do much damage. I swear I chase them off once I'm done taking a little bit of clip. But they do it all the time, and I have to chase them off my card because it's not mine, it's my father's, and he'd be very angry with me if they either pooped or pulled up their windshield wiper. So yeah, but here's a clip of it. They look very innocuous, doing a little preening. Surely nothing can be wrong. But then, right as you think something's fine, they start pulling at the windshield wiper, and they just pull at it, and then it can get crazy really quickly. I've seen as many as probably 20 birds perched on top of a car, and they're all just all up in it, like inside the pickup truck's trunk bed, just exploring. I'm not sure what they have what the interest where the interest came from, but I looked it up briefly, and this is a behavior that occurs essentially all the way down the Atlantic seaboard. It happens in Florida, it happens North Carolina, it happens I think even in the like I think in Missouri I saw one too. So they really just do it everywhere, and it's so cool because I don't know where they picked it up, but I don't think they do it in Central America. Here's a quick video I took of one, some editing. It's just impossible to. Yeah, so you can see they're quite the little spies there. The one who kind of saw I was there and decided enough was enough and flew off. But yeah, but also they'll still fight on top of a car. So there were two guys here, and I don't know how they decided they were enemies, but this is a kind of a nasty one. And then this third bird comes up, not really interested in the fight, just interested in the windshield wipers. But then you'll see it kind of gets taken out here. Oh, it's actually a young bird. I'm looking. Yeah. But yeah, they fight. That bird gets hit, and then the chase continues. So you can see all of them down there, all around the car. So yeah, they really, really got into it. But they're the funniest things. And every single time I go, I've gone, I think I went 3 times this summer, and every time I saw something new, it was the coolest thing. But yeah, but then just to keep things a little bit serious, just a reminder why vultures are important. I'm sure everybody knows why because they're birders, but they are nature's cleanup crew. They remove dead animals from the environment, which reduces disease. And again, they're the only obligate scavengers, which means that they're only ones whose job it is to do this on the daily. They eliminate toxic bacteria and diseases because their stomach acid is actually 100 times more acidic than ours is, which means that they can actually eliminate anthrax, cholera, rabies, botulism, tuberculosis, all these really, really bad pathogens that we don't want in the population of anything. And they get rid of it. So a lot of people think, and a lot of people have who come to Conowingo to fish or to look at the eagles or whatever will stop by me and they're like, don't get too close, they'll cause disease. And of course, you shouldn't get close to any wild animal in general, but it is also a what's the word? It is also a rumor or sorry, the word's not coming to me. That vultures cause disease. They do actually the opposite. They're really important. And along with that, they have massive entertainment value. I'm sure a show, if anybody's watched Meerkat Manor, that's a really great dramatic reality TV documentary show. I'm sure someone would do one about vultures and it would just do fantastic. Maybe that's my passion project. I'm not sure. But yeah, they are really amazing. And I hope I've convinced you of that. I just love them so much. And in summation, they are very multifaceted individuals. Here's one last clip I'll leave you with of two birds just hanging out, several birds hanging out, and then right through the middle of them comes a little chase, and that it sums them up completely. They loaf around most of the time, but there's always something going on, and so yeah, they're really really fun to watch. And I suggest the next time you, or if you ever come across a vulture roost, just hang out for a little bit. Don't get too close because again, you don't want to make them want to throw up for one. They will probably fly away before they do that. And also they smell really bad. So I don't suggest getting very close. But they are really fun to watch. And thank you for listening. All right. Should I stop sharing? I guess.
Thank you so much, Kojo. That was a really entertaining talk. I've always liked vultures, but you made me see them in a whole new light. So I really appreciate that.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah. I will take questions. Do we have any in the room?
Sure, I got one.
All right.
How long after they fledge do they get fed by regurgitation?
Yeah, so the jury's still out on that. The longest that what has been seen getting fed by regurgitation is 8 months after, which if you take into account the time it takes to incubate and then the time it takes for one to fledge, is almost a year of associated with their parents. Eventually they get weaned, if you will. They eventually have to learn how to fight for themselves, and they'll basically go off into the world after that and explore a bit before finding some place to settle down and eventually breed. But I think the average is probably about 3 to 4 months after fledging. But then they still remain pretty close with their parents for a little while after that.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, I see you have your hand raised.
Hi, was that me?
Yes.
Thanks, Naveen. Great talk, Kojo. I think probably crossed paths with you at Hawk Mountain last year. Two questions. One is, I'm curious if you have any sense of how their kind of distinctive behaviors are different from other species of vultures.
Yeah.
And then the other question, I was curious, what is all the fighting about? I mean, sometimes, is there really anything at stake? So there's my question.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so for the first question, what's different about them is how often they stay in contact with one another. For turkey vultures, for instance, are not nearly as social birds. You'll see a couple turkey vultures together, but they don't spend they don't really roost together or form these communal roosts where one bird follows another. They essentially find their own food and are mostly solitary or stay in pairs. Black vultures will form these huge roosts of hundreds of birds, and that's really unique among New World vultures. Old World, I'm not super sure. I know that in terms of what they do at feeding sites, like the fighting and everything, that's a bit more. A lot of vultures do that, but what's different about black vultures is that they do it pretty much everywhere. And in terms of why the fighting is so important, jury's still out on that one. The aggression essentially lets birds know, I guess, not to mess with one another, but it also again is important mostly for local breeding adults to limit the number of potential food followers, because they have to have a certain amount of food that they bring back to. They have 2 young chicks to feed most of the time, or yeah, especially since they're young, stick with them for very long. And so they really have to limit the number of people who, or sorry, vultures who aren't directly related to them or even somewhat related to them. They much prefer. There's something called, I think, um, indirect fitness and in ecology, where a bird that may not be a direct descendant but is a relative of some sort is still getting some indirect fitness benefit by helping a relative. And so that's probably the case in vultures as well, where these family units protect each other because it helps them. And so it's really all about who gets a piece of the pie. At Conowingo, it's interesting because they get fed, not by me, of course, but by fishermen will like throw little scraps at them and they'll eat trash and whatever. And they can stomach it because of course of the stomach acid and stuff. But and then also later in the season when the eagles start popping by and chasing each other, and sometimes when an eagle drops a fish or gets chased and dropped a fish and it gets dropped on the rocks, a lot of times the vultures will come in and squabble over it and stuff. So it's really a method of limiting food following and just kind of keeping resources for yourself and those who you're related to. But it also is important in terms of just general social standing in the roost. Yeah, sorry, I hope that was coherent. It's kind of a mix of things, but yeah.
All right. I have some questions in the chat. Judy Stefanowski. How long do black vultures live?
Black vultures live, people think, and sorry for the noise, but they live about they can live decades. It's, I think the oldest bird is somewhere in the 20s, maybe 27, and that was in captivity, but they can also live quite long in the wild as well, especially because they delay breeding for so long. So it's really interesting that they do that. And I'm sure that the youngest breeding bird is not 8 years old, but it's still kind of unknown exactly how early they start breeding. But yeah.
Oh, thank you. Next question on the chat. Daniel says, great talk, thanks. How is your photography relationship with black vultures? Does the time and proximity from research make it better or worse? Do you have a dream shot you'd still like to capture?
I
can repeat
relationship is it's good. I actually do a lot more videography now because I have an Instagram account and Instagram just likes videos. The algorithm likes videos more than photos. So I don't take many photos of them, but I think research probably made it better because there I took a lot more photos and I got a lot of cute videos of the young ones and stuff. But I think in terms of dream shot, I definitely like to capture more action shots. And I was actually just thinking that during the talk, and I was thinking about like a little screen grab I captured of the fighting. And I was like, it'd be really cool to capture them like in that kind of fight, like the little kung fu thing where they jump up and kick each other and stuff like that. It's the less common version, I would say. And I usually jump to video when I see it, but I will have to make that conscious decision to get some action shots next time because it's like the coolest thing. And they're not the only ones who fight that way, or that I know of. Or a lot of vultures do that little kung fu thing, but they're the only ones I know that really do these full-blown fights and these shoulder push fights. Then again, I don't know every single vulture species in the world. So yeah, in terms of dream shot, it'd probably be some kind of action shot, but that's more of lack of not really thinking about it consciously in the field versus just not getting it. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. And if anybody on the chat has questions that you'd like to ask rather than me reading them, please raise your hands. I'll call you out. But I will move on. Not a question, but a comment. Krista says, really interesting. I prefer vultures with black heads to red heads.
That's true. I do too, although I love them both. But yeah, I do too. They're pretty cool.
And then Janet says, they seem to get along with turkey vultures. And as they are moving north, not competing, but cooperating.
Yeah, that's interesting. They actually outnumber turkey vultures and outpower them at feeding sites, even though turkey vultures often find the carrion first. Black vultures are just more aggressive by nature. So even though they're slightly smaller, they tend to overpower turkey vultures and get their fill first. So they do actually directly compete, but not in a way that excludes turkey vultures. I'd say there's usually enough for everybody. And turkey vultures, just by nature of usually being the first to a carcass, that's their niche that they exploit because they have such a great sense of smell. they're able to find a lot of carcasses first, and maybe get there like a little bit before all the black vultures show up. So I wouldn't say that they cooperate, but they also they do compete, but they don't compete as much like to the point of excluding. It's not like say barred owls and spotted owls, or barred owls are pushing spotted owls out. There seems to be enough for everybody at this point in time. Yeah, and that happens all the way down south too. I mean, both turkey vultures and black vultures you can find all the way through Central and South America, and they coexist all throughout that range. So yeah.
Thank you. I think you answered a very similar question, but I'm going to read it again in case you had any other thoughts. So Keith says, any thoughts about how black vultures differ ecologically from turkey vultures?
Yeah, it is kind of the same. It's mostly that social behavior. Again, turkey vultures are, they're not exactly solo birds, but they just form a lot smaller of roosts, and they don't do any of this fighting and chasing stuff. They just kind of just sit together and, they do their thing. And they also, I don't think that the young stick around as long, although they are probably also similarly long-lived and develop pretty slow as well. Yeah, but one cool difference between them is that sense of smell. So turkey vultures, again, are able to smell carrion from miles away. Black vultures cannot do that. They can only use sight. And so especially in areas like this, black vultures will follow turkey vultures or spot turkey vultures at carrion sites and then bring them down. But then once they're there, they get followed by other black vultures from the roost, and then they all overpower the turkey vultures. But then squabble amongst themselves at the same time. It's very interesting. But yeah, they definitely are. They're definitely very different. In terms of not character. That's the wrong word. A disposition, I think, is a good word for it. But also their method of sociality and stuff.
Oh, thank you. We have a few more questions on chat. Just to break it up, anybody in the room? Yeah, Marty.
So they're moving north, but what's the southern end of their range?
I think the southern end of the range is almost the very tip of South America. They got really far south in Argentina. They're just, and they seem common where we are, but I'm telling you, down south in Central and South America, it's a whole different ballgame. They're like commoner than crows down there. It's really it's the coolest, and it's because there's just so much for them to eat. There are more mammals down there. There's a photo I had in here with a little bit of an agouti carcass, which is kind of like a miniature capybara. There are so many of those down there, and they eat those. There's just more life down there, and so they are able to proliferate a lot more. But they really expand quite far.
So I think of South America, I could be wrong about this, not having as many turkey vultures. They have the yellow-headed vultures, I guess. So they associate with the other vultures as well, or follow them around? Or
Sorry?
do they associate or follow the other vultures around down there?
Yeah, the yellow-headed and turkey vultures, and king vultures as well, are the species that you find down there, and they do follow them around. I think yellow-headed vultures also have a great sense of smell. I'm not sure about king vultures, but I do know that even though black vultures are the smallest out of the bunch, they're still the most dominant, and I think they even overpower Andean condors too. I think I read that correctly, or at least give them a good fight. So they're, even though Indian condors are like almost twice the size, the black vultures are just so tenacious and also just outnumber everybody else. They're able to do that. But yeah, it's the coolest thing.
Thank you. Back to the chat.
Question.
Let me do one
Okay.
of the chat, and then I'll get to you. Linda asks, I read that California condors had problems with the adults eating trash and feeding their young. Is this a problem with the vultures?
I'm not sure. I personally have not seen anything about that, but I'm sure they do eat trash. Here, it's probably more of a problem in Central and South America, but there are also so many of them that it probably isn't too much of a problem. The nests I saw, I didn't really see any trash being fed. It was mostly just actual organic matter, what they were supposed to be feeding their young. But I'm sure it's a problem with condors because there are so few of them. With vultures, or black vultures at least, there are just so many of them that even if it was, it probably wouldn't lead to much. Their population is super stable. So, but they do eat trash, a lot of trash. I'm not sure if they're able to discern what's good and what's bad, but yeah, it's definitely probably more of a problem with the condors.
Thank you, Greg. Go ahead.
really just wonderful, wonderful talk. Congratulations, on that, doing that for your thesis and bringing that and sharing it with us.
Yeah.
Following up on the question about trash, I was wondering, and again, I may have missed it, so I'm sorry, I apologize if I did. Any trouble as far as lead, the problem with condors and the whole issue with lead toxicity? That's number one. Second, West Nile virus, hit, as you may or may not know, hit when it hit the United States and hit birds. It really seemed to hit a lot of the large birds, whether they were just had more surface area for mosquitoes or so great horned owls and crows. Anyway, just wondered about those two
Yeah.
issues.
As for lead and carrion, I'm not super sure. I don't think it's again too much of an issue. Both turkey and black vultures are doing pretty well in the US, especially compared to condors because they were just more common to begin with, which is a good thing. I know black vultures are doing especially well and expanding. But in terms of sorry, your second question was,
Well,
could you
just wondered about whether West Nile
oh yeah.
virus, whether you happen to know whether
Yeah.
that hit them.
I don't think it hit vultures, but what did hit them was the avian influenza epidemic. And that was interesting because vultures typically aren't hit by epidemics of that nature because they have such robust immune systems. And like I said, they can digest and eradicate a lot of forms of bacteria. And so it was really interesting. This isn't the first time that the avian influenza has hit vultures, but this one was particularly brutal. And I think it's on the tail end now. But actually, while I was doing my thesis, a lot of avenues weren't really available to me that normally would have been available. And so, which is why I decided to do camera traps because it was something that I could really, and there were a lot of issues with like I couldn't figure out what to do. And yeah, it was kind of a salvaging act at the end, but it worked out, I would say. But yeah, the avian influenza hit them pretty hard all up from Florida all the way through mid-Atlantic and Northeast. But I think they've recovered from it now. And I don't think that it's come back. I think influenza is still a problem, but I'm not sure it's hitting them now. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, of course.
Okay, we have a couple more comments and questions on the chat. Not sure how much I agree with this, but Lloyd says they're not quite as ugly as turkey vultures. That is a plus. I think turkey vultures are pretty good-looking birds, but all right. Did you say if there's a hierarchy between black and turkey vultures, the turkey vultures feed first?
Yeah, I would also disagree. I think they're both pretty, but to each their own. To each their own. I said that there is somewhat of a hierarchy. So turkey vultures feed first because they find food first, but black vultures outnumber them and are just more aggressive by nature. So when they show up to a carcass, they tend to outnumber and overpower the turkey vultures. I think I may have read something about them, maybe just because of the sheer number of them being able to rip into carcasses more. But I'm not sure how much truth there is to that or if it has an impact. But there seems to be enough for everybody to go around for the most part. But generally, when both black and turkey vultures are at a carcass, the black vultures will, because they're more aggressive by nature, feed before them, or feed more than them. Yeah.
Cool. I only see two more comments and not really questions in the chat.
Harry wants me to share a photo.
Sorry?
Harry wants me to share a photo. She sent me a photo to share.
Okay. Before we move on to the last two comments in the chat, does anybody in the room or the chat have any questions? All right, no questions, so I'll read the last two comments. Krista says, this last picture makes me think of an English barrister with a black robe and a curly white wig. I think that, yeah, that's the picture we have.
Yeah, I see it. I see it. That's pretty cool. This bird was really curious in me. I think when humans come close to them, they think that they have, this was at Conowingo, they think they have food. And so I kind of exploit that because they'll approach me, but I try to make sure they don't get too close. They never touch me or anything. But I just think the detail on it is so cool. This was like kind of right within that close focus range, but it's so cool looking. Sorry again about the noise in the back.
And Janet says, great presentation, many thanks. One of my best memories as a bird watcher is seeing an adult black vulture preening a young vulture on the nest. Very tender interaction. They're beautiful birds.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah, they're such caring parents. It's really cool to see. And it's such an interesting diverging from how they act when anybody threatens their young. I couldn't find any good videos of at least in time of one of a bird threatening a young bird and then the adult moving in, but they really protect their young quite fiercely. And it's funny because then those same parents will bully other birds too. It's really it's a really quite complicated dominance hierarchy that I wish I had any idea how to go about deconstructing, but it's cool to witness either way. Yeah.
Sure. Any last questions?
So we'll see if this works or not. And Perry, you can explain it. Okay, so it didn't like my pictures before, so we'll see if it works this time. Still not. Oh, man.
Oh,
there
there
it
it
goes.
Oh, I got it. Oh, look at them.
These are on the roof of Barb's house in Cape May.
Oh.
We often rent the house next door, and one day there was a whole flock of black vultures on her house, and it must have
Oh.
been family because they were all preening and interacting. It was
Yeah, it looks like the one below kind of the one to the right, the one that's actually perched on the roof, not the one kind of climbing on him. It looks like a young one. Um yeah, they don't have the wrinkles yet. And they kind of have a bit darker of a face. Yeah, so that's so cool. Oh,
It
they
worked,
are so
Perry.
cute. I love them so much. They're just the coolest.
They are cool.
Yeah,
Thank you. So.
right.
Well, thank you so much, Kojo. That was an absolutely entertaining talk. I think we all
Oh, of
loved it.
course.
And
I'm
thank you.
glad. I'm so glad. Thank you for having me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you so much. That was a lot of fun. Appreciate it.
Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you.